They thought I was just a suburban dad, an easy target. But when they laid hands on my son, they didn't realize they were awakening a ghost, the smell of home. That's the first thing that always hit me. Not the smell of jet fuel or cordite or the stale, recycled air of a C-130. It was the scent of my wife Lena's garlic bread, the faint, sweet perfume of the flowers on the windowsill, and the clean, lived-in aroma of a house filled with love. After 3 months in places you only see in classified briefings, that smell was my anchor. It was the one thing that reminded me who I was when I wasn't being commander. Here, I was just Marcus, husband, father. I dropped my duffel bag by the door, the weight of it a familiar comfort. "I'm home," I called out. My 7-year-old daughter Maya came tearing around the corner, her braids flying. "Daddy!" she squealed, launching herself into my arms. I lifted her up, burying my face in her hair. She smelled like sunshine and crayons. My son, David, who at 16 was trying his best to be too cool for everything, followed at a more leisurely pace. But I saw the crack in his stoic facade, a genuine, relieved smile. "Hey, Pops, trip go okay?" Same old, I lied easily. Sales conferences are always a drag. Lena appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was beautiful, the lines of worry on her forehead smoothing out the second she saw me. She walked over and wrapped her arms around both me and Maya, her kiss a silent promise of normalcy. This was my world. This was the safe space I'd built, the very thing I fought to protect in the shadows so it could flourish in the light. We were just sitting down to dinner when the first knock came. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was hard, authoritative, the kind that vibrates through the floorboards. David and I exchanged a look. We lived in a quiet, manicured suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where people bring you welcome baskets, not where police pound on your door. I opened it to find 2 officers from the local department standing on my porch. One was older, with a weathered face and a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform. The other was younger, fitter, with a sharp, predatory look in his eyes that I recognized instantly. I'd seen that look on young soldiers itching for a fight. It was the look of someone who saw the world as a nail and was desperate to be the hammer. "Good evening, officers," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. I placed myself squarely in the doorway, a friendly but immovable object. "How can I help you?" The older one, whose name tag read Miller, spoke first. "Sir, we've had a noise complaint from one of your neighbors." I blinked. The only sound in our house was the low murmur of the television and our dinner conversation. A noise complaint. "Officer, my family and I were just sitting down to eat." The younger one, Rossi, craned his neck to look past me into my home. His eyes swept over my family, lingering for a moment too long on David. "Sounded like a party," he said, his tone accusatory. "Loud music, shouting." This was wrong. Every instinct in my body, honed by years of threat assessment in the most dangerous places on earth, was screaming at me. This wasn't a noise complaint. This was a pretext. "I can assure you, you've got the wrong house," I said, my polite demeanor starting to feel like a poorly fitting suit. "We've been quiet all evening." "Why don't you let us come in and take a look around?" Rossi suggested, his hand drifting down to rest on the butt of his sidearm. It wasn't a threat, not yet, but it was a statement. "I don't think that's necessary," I replied, my voice dropping half an octave. "You don't have a warrant, and there's no cause for you to enter my home." Miller sighed, looking tired, but Rossi's eyes lit up. This was the friction he was looking for. "Getting a little defensive, aren't we? Got something to hide?" he goaded, taking a step closer. Behind me I heard Lena gasp softly. I could feel David tense up. He was a good kid, but he had a teenager's sense of injustice, a fire that could get him into trouble. "David, take your sister to her room," I ordered, not taking my eyes off the 2 men on my porch. "But Dad—" Now David. The command in my voice, the one I usually kept locked away, slipped out. David recognized it, and after a slight hesitation, complied, gently guiding a frightened Maya away from the door. Rossi smirked. "Tough guy, huh? Ordering your family around." He took another step, invading my personal space. "We're going to need to see some ID. Everyone in the house." This was harassment, pure and simple. They were fishing, trying to provoke a reaction. My training was a constant whisper in my ear. De-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. But the father in me wanted to put my fist through this man's smug face. I held my ground. You came to my door with a false noise complaint. Now you're demanding to see my family's identification without cause. You are leaving my property. Now. Rossi's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. He looked at Miller, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That was all he needed. Rossi put his hand on my chest and shoved. We're not going anywhere. In that split second, the world slowed down. I saw the move before it happened. My body, conditioned by 1,000 life-or-death scenarios, wanted to react. It wanted to disarm him, neutralize him, and have his partner in a disabling hold before either of them could even process what happened. But I couldn't. I was Marcus, the suburban dad. I let the shove move me back a step, keeping my balance easily. But then David, who had come back to the edge of the hallway, saw it. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cracking with outrage. "Get your hands off my dad." That was the mistake. Rossi's head snapped towards him, a wolf finding a new target. He moved past me with surprising speed, getting right in David's face. "What did you say to me, you little punk?" I moved instantly, placing myself between them. My hands were up, open palms, a universal sign of peace that felt utterly foreign to me. "Officer, that's my son. He's a minor. Back away from him." But Rossi wasn't listening. His rage had found a focus. He shoved David hard. My son, caught off guard, stumbled back against the wall with a grunt of pain. And in that moment something inside me broke. The carefully constructed wall between Marcus the father and the commander of an elite Tier 1 Special Missions unit crumbled into dust. The neighborhood, the house, the smell of garlic bread, it all faded away. I was no longer in my hallway. I was in a kill zone, and the threat was 5 feet from my child. Rossi, high on his power trip, pointed a trembling finger at my son. "That's it. He just assaulted an officer. You're under arrest," he snarled, reaching for his handcuffs. Lena screamed. I could hear Maya crying from her bedroom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move a muscle. I just let the cold, flat emptiness that I reserved for my enemies seep into my eyes. I looked straight at Officer Miller, the man in charge, the man who let this happen. "Officer," I said, my voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it cut through the chaos like a razor. "Call your supervisor. Call your chief of police. Call the mayor if you have to. Because you two have just made a mistake that is going to end your careers. And if he puts those cuffs on my son, I promise you, that will be the last thing he ever does with his hands." The air in the hallway crackled with a sudden, dangerous stillness. For a moment, no one moved. Officer Miller's weary expression was replaced by one of genuine alarm. He saw it. He saw the shift in my eyes, the absolute certainty in my voice. He'd been a cop long enough to know the difference between a drunk's bluster and a predator's promise. Rossi, however, saw only a challenge. A laugh, short and sharp, escaped his lips. "You threatening me? You think you're some kind of movie tough guy?" He turned his back on me, a fatal tactical error, and reached for David again. "That's it. I'm adding resisting arrest and threatening an officer to your little boys." He never finished the sentence. I moved. There was no rage, no anger, just cold, efficient purpose. My left hand shot out and clamped down on his wrist, my thumb finding the pressure point on the radial nerve. Rossi yelped as a jolt of pure agony shot up his arm, and the handcuffs clattered to the floor. Simultaneously, my right foot swept his legs out from under him. It was a simple, controlled takedown, something we practiced 1,000 times until it was pure muscle memory. He went down hard, the air exploding from his lungs as his back hit the hardwood floor. Before he could even register what had happened, I was kneeling on his chest, my forearm pressed firmly against his throat, not crushing him, just controlling him, reminding him who was in charge of his next breath. It took less than 2 seconds. Silence. Then, a sharp click. I looked up. Officer Miller, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly, had drawn his service weapon. It was pointed directly at my chest. "Freeze! Get off him! On the ground, now!" he yelled, his voice strained. I didn't move. I didn't even look down at Rossi, who was now gasping for air beneath me. I held Miller's gaze. "You need to put that away, officer," I said, my voice calm and even. "You are not the one in control of this situation." "I said get on the ground," he repeated, his finger tightening on the trigger. From the living room, Lena sobbed. "Marcus, please, just do what he says." I pulled David behind me with my free hand, shielding him with my body. "It's okay, son. Stay with your mother." Then I looked back at Miller. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was scared. His partner had been neutralized with shocking speed by a man who was now staring down the barrel of his gun as if it were a minor inconvenience. He was following protocol, but his instincts were telling him his protocol was useless here. "You have a choice, Miller," I said, using his name to anchor his attention. "You can escalate this, and I promise you, it will not end well for you. Or you can lower your weapon, call your watch commander, and pray he's smart enough to understand the mess you've made." Rossi started to struggle beneath me, a string of curses catching in his throat. I applied a whisper of pressure, and he went still again, his eyes wide with fear. He finally understood. I slowly, deliberately, released Rossi and stood up, raising my hands to show they were empty. Rossi scrambled away from me, coughing and wheezing as he fumbled for his own weapon. "Don't," I warned, my voice like ice. Rossi froze, his hand hovering over his holster. "Just stay right there," Miller commanded, waving his gun between me and Rossi. "Both of you." Ignoring him, I reached into my back pocket. Miller's gun jerked. "I told you not to move." "I'm getting my phone," I said. My movements slow and deliberate. I never broke eye contact with him. I pulled out my phone and held it up. "I'm ending this. For your sake." I swiped the screen and hit a single number on my speed dial. It rang once before a voice answered, clipped and professional. "Go." Miller's eyes widened. This wasn't a call to 911. This wasn't a lawyer. "This is Blackjack 6, I said, my entire demeanor shifting. The suburban father vanished completely, replaced by the commander. "I have a code Whiskey Romeo at my primary residence. I repeat, a Whiskey Romeo." I paused, my eyes locked on Miller's. I saw the flicker of dawning horror on his face. He didn't know the code, but he knew it wasn't good. "Two armed hostiles, identifying as local law enforcement, have breached my home and assaulted my family. My perimeter is compromised." Rossi, still on the floor, looked at his partner in confusion. "What the hell is he talking about?" Miller didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, his gun now seeming to weigh 1,000 pounds in his hand. "Affirmative, Blackjack 6. The voice on the phone crackled, now sharp with urgency. "Is condition red declared?" I looked at my terrified wife, holding my crying daughter. I looked at my son, his face a mask of shock and anger. Then I looked back at the two men who had brought this chaos into my sanctuary. "Negative," I said into the phone, "but we are 1 second away. I need a full legal and operational response team. ETA, now." I gave him my address. "And listen to me carefully. Tell General Matthews that someone just tried to put his hands on my son." The silence after I hung up was heavier than anything I'd ever experienced in a combat zone. It was the silence of a clock ticking down to 0. Miller still had his gun pointed at me, but the conviction had drained from his stance. Rossi was pushing himself up, his face a furious, confused mess. He was a bully who just punched a hornet's nest and couldn't understand why the sky was turning dark. "What was that?" Rossi spat, finally getting to his feet. "Calling your gangbanger friends?" Before I could answer, the night outside our quiet suburban street erupted. It started with a low thrumming, a sound that I knew intimately, but was utterly alien to this neighborhood. The sound of heavy rotors beating the air into submission. It grew louder, faster, shaking the windows in their frames. Red and blue lights were suddenly eclipsed by brilliant white spotlights that turned our front lawn into a stage. Miller's jaw went slack. He and Rossi both stumbled to the window. Outside, our street, usually filled with minivans and Priuses, looked like a scene from a military thriller. Two black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburbans had screeched to a halt, blocking the road in both directions. Men in tactical gear, no uniforms, no identifying marks, just black fatigues and plate carriers were pouring out, their movements crisp and economical. They established a perimeter with a speed and efficiency that made the two local cops look like children playing dress-up. Hovering just above the rooftops was a black MH-6 Little Bird helicopter, its searchlight painting our house. My earpiece, a discreet device I wore even at home, chirped to life. Blackjack 6, this is Nomad 1. We have eyes on. Perimeter is secure. Give us the signal. Stand by, Nomad 1, I replied under my breath. Miller spun around from the window, his face as white as a sheet. He finally lowered his gun. Who are you? He stammered. My front door burst open. It wasn't kicked in. It was simply opened by a man who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who owned any room he walked into. He was in a suit, not tactical gear, but he carried an aura of authority more potent than any weapon. Behind him, two of the operators fanned out, their rifles held in a low, ready position as they scanned the room. The man in the suit, a grim-faced lawyer from the JAG Corps I knew only as Mr. Peters, ignored the two cops completely. His eyes found me. Commander, are you and your family secure? We are, I said, nodding toward Lena and the kids, who were huddled by the kitchen doorway, their fear now mixed with utter bewilderment. My family is unharmed. Peters' gaze then fell upon Miller and Rossi. It was like watching a predator select its prey. Local law enforcement? He asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Yes, sir, Miller mumbled, his authority completely gone. Rossi, ever the fool, puffed out his chest. Hey, you can't just barge in here. This is a police matter. Peters didn't even look at him. He snapped his fingers and one of the operators stepped forward, holding a tablet. Peters took it and held it out for Miller to see. Officer Miller, Officer Rossi, my name is Mark Peters. I am legal counsel for the United States Army Special Operations Command. The man whose home you have illegally entered and whose family you have terrorized is Commander Marcus Thorne. He is the commanding officer of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Does that name mean anything to you? I watched the last bit of color drain from Miller's face. Rossi just looked blank. Delta Force might as well have been a fraternity to him. But Miller knew. Every cop with more than 10 years on the job knew the legends, the rumors of the ghost units the government used when things went truly dark. The call you are about to receive, Peters continued, his voice dangerously low, is from General David Matthews, a 4-star general and the head of Joint Special Operations Command. I believe he is a personal friend of your governor. He's going to explain to you, in very clear terms, the gravity of your situation. He is also going to ask why 2 of your officers decided to harass the family of a man who has spent the last 18 years secretly fighting this country's enemies. As if on cue, Miller's radio squawked to life. A panicked voice, clearly his chief, was demanding to know what in God's name was happening on my street. Miller fumbled for the radio, his hands shaking too badly to work the buttons. Rossi just stood there, his mouth hanging open, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on him. He hadn't tried to arrest a civilian. He'd tried to arrest a weapon. Peters turned to me. Commander, the general sends his regards and asks if you require medical attention. We're fine, I said, walking over to my family. I wrapped my arms around Lena and pulled David into the hug. We're all fine now. Peters nodded. General Matthews has also made some suggestions to the chief of police. I believe Officers Miller and Rossi will be turning in their badges and firearms as soon as they get back to the station. Their careers in law enforcement, in any capacity, are over. There will also be a civil suit, which my office will be handling on your behalf, to ensure they understand the consequences of their actions for the rest of their lives. I looked over at the 2 men. Miller wouldn't meet my eyes. He was a broken man. Rossi was staring at me, his bravado replaced by a primal fear. He finally understood that the world was much, much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Within minutes, it was over. The operators melted back into the night. The Suburbans drove off. The helicopter vanished into the sky. Mr. Peters gave me a curt nod and left, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. It was as if a storm had descended upon our quiet street and then disappeared without a trace, leaving only 2 broken men standing in my living room. A few minutes later, a police cruiser driven by a grim-faced sergeant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, arrived to collect them. He didn't say a word to me, just loaded his disgraced officers into the back and drove away. The smell of home slowly started to return. garlic bread and safety. I closed the door, the familiar click of the lock feeling more final, more important than ever. I turned to my family. Maya had stopped crying. David was looking at me with a newfound respect, a flicker of awe in his teenage eyes. And Lena, my beautiful, strong Lena, walked over and put her hand on my cheek. "A sales conference, huh?" she asked, a small, weary smile playing on her lips. I pulled her close, resting my forehead against hers. "Something like that," I whispered. The world outside could be as loud and chaotic as it wanted, but in here, in this house, with this family, was my true command post. And I would protect it, no matter who came knocking.